Hello, my name is Jonathan Forster, and welcome to the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. I'm an interior designer and educator. My job is to improve quality of life and productivity by helping people to create beautiful and practical spaces to live and work in. The Multi-Story Thinking Podcast takes an educational slant to the interior design world. So sit back, relax, as we help unravel the mysteries of interior design. Today we talk to Nathan Hurley. Nathan is the Research and Insight Manager at furniture manufacturer Orangebox. Nathan is responsible for driving the research into understanding new behaviours and identifying challenges so that they can design better working solutions for the workplace and education sectors. I spoke to Nathan with my co-host Kay Hanson via Zoom. In this episode we discover the cultural and technological shifts that have inspired changes in the design of furniture, how competition amongst universities has driven investment in learning spaces, how Nathan began his career with Orangebox as a casual holiday worker, and why hula hooping could provide the solution for post-lockdown workspaces. Nathan, thanks very much for joining us on the Multi-Story Thinking Podcast. We're talking via Zoom, and we've got Kay Hanson as well in our Zoom room. Welcome, Hi. Kay. Nice to see you. Nice to see you, Nathan.
Just to give you a little bit of background, Jonathan, I'm currently back on furlough for a couple of months because we're launching something at Orangebox called the Hula Hoop Office. And it's a bit of a reaction to the sort of Chernobyl crisis type response that we've seen from Cushman Wakefield and JLL and all of those very responsible organizations. And so we're trying to take a bit of a light-hearted approach, try and change the tone of voice. And so the Hula Hoop Office is all about, look, you think about your social distancing with your hula hoop, we're all going to have to sign into this behavioral contract. And we think, as from Orangebox, this is quite a nice idea to think about. And so there are nice little accessories about how we help people. Rather than sort of have some police tape over the space, why not have some sort of nice design signage, etc. So I've got a project literally that I'm launching externally tomorrow, which is the Hula Hoop Office.
You're talking about people adopting behavioural shifts automatically or being prompted to do that by the design of the space and not to be relying on a whole load of warning signs and yellow tape and that sort of thing. A more intuitive approach to design to change the way we interact?
Yeah, we're thinking about, at the moment, there's a lot of propositions that are taking away. So we were in quite a nice sweet spot. The journey that we were on pre-COVID in regards to the designing of our commercial workspaces was a really healthy space. There was a great adoption of activity-based working, countless numbers of WELL standards being introduced. It's kind of the fruits of our labour had really started to happen nicely, and I feel at the moment a lot of responses has been about taking some of that away, with our social distancing measures, of course, being 2 meters. But globally, that changes entirely because we've got a project with Huawei in India, and their COVID social distancing isn't 2 meters at all; it's 3 meters. And in Germany, it's less than 2 meters. And in New Zealand right now, I think as of yesterday, there is no social distancing measures. So at the moment, it was all about taking sort of value away from a space. And I think at Orangebox, what we're trying to do is think about a few ideas to actually make the space a little bit more intuitive and work towards you. There's been a wonderful report, actually, or it's more of a survey than a report, a weekly program that comes out from I think WK Space and Hannah Nardini and her team are kind of putting together some surveys, and you may have been exposed to them. But really what's being highlighted is kind of the sentiment of a lot of architects and space designers, is that actually the office is going to be more about coming together and connecting with our colleagues. All of that's kind of menial task-based, focused work. I think we've all just figured out we can do that at home. Actually, it's quite slick and efficient at home. But all the socializing, the collaboration is going to have to take place at work. So rather than focusing on desk spaces and having 2-meter distances, we're trying to think of a few ideas about how we can, I guess, change people's behavior when they come into work. And that's really challenging, because I've been reading a lot about behavioral contracts and how we're going to have to all sign up to whatever, depending upon whatever your employer's strategy is pre-vaccine, then we're all going to have to, and it's really, the way in which we can think about it is, okay, as an individual, I can, that message that comes over the tannoy on the airplane, which is, put your mask on before helping others. We've got to really think about that. That's kind of sort of rule number one, if you like, of the behavioural contract, because you've got to get your house in order. You've got to think about your social distancing space. But ultimately, sort of rule number two is that you've all got to engage. You've all got to give trust and confidence that we've all signed this behavioural contract. And so what does that, we've been scratching our heads at Orangebox. What does that mean for co-working spaces? What does that mean for shared live work environments where actually one employer's behavioural contract might be very different from another's? Even in your household, one partner might have might have to behave differently in their workplace than the other. So at the moment, being honest with you, Jonathan, okay, we're just trying to absorb as much as we can and kind of pitch some ideas back and see how they float. That's what the Hula Hoop office is all about, really, a kind of a new spirit and an ideology about, okay, let's not take this sort of Chernobyl crisis approach. Let's not drive apprehension and anxiety about coming into a workplace. How can we drive some positivity? And I really like the hula hoop idea, because back in the 50s and 60s, when the hula hoop kind of became its phenomenon, if you like, it was a great social leveler. I've been doing a lot of reading on this, and it's taken me to quite a few holes in the internet. But the hula hoop was a great social leveler. So the sort of rich and famous, if you like, sort of upper east side of New York, they would use it for their fitness regimes. You could go to nightclubs in the deep south, and they'd be hula hooping in their nightclubs, and then you'd have working class kids in the streets also hula hooping. And it was one of the first sort of social levelers in regards to, effectively, it was pitched at all various different spaces. A toy, it was a fitness aid. And if we think about it, that's kind of going to be similar to our new behavioural contracts in work, because there's no getting away. The sort of CEO of the organisation or whoever else, COVID's become a bit of a social leveler when we think about our behavioural contract with work. But when we think about space, everybody's got to engage in this new contract. And I think that the Hula Hoop office brings a nice spirit to try and entice people back to the workplace.
Sounds like a really pragmatic approach to looking to the future, which is quite uncertain. It doesn't involve any hula hooping. I'm really bad at hula hooping. We're talking about the orbit of space around you, aren't we?
Before the pandemic, did you envisage that the workspace was heading towards this direction just on a slower pace, rather than there being desk spaces becoming a more social environment, more people working from home gradually as life changes? And do you think that the pandemic has just sped that process up?
Yeah, okay, you sort of took the words out of my mouth, really, talking about the speed at which we're adopting these things. I think COVID, just looking and reading, has been a great accelerator for certain things. Think about sort of online consumption, online consumerism, think about a cashless society. And I think moving within our workplaces, moving to more social and collaborative environments. We were on that journey anyway. The discussion last year about working a 4-day week or 5-day working hours across a 4-day week was starting to gain some traction. There were a lot of trials and tests being taken place throughout Europe with that. The notion of activity-based working, what we call it smart working at Orangebox, but activity-based working effectively is starting to become our default setting for many organizations. If you sort of look at many of the sort of REBA accredited or celebrated spaces of the last 2 or 3 years in regards to large workplaces. They'll all have components of activity-based working, migrating away from the 1-to-1 fixed desk ratio to having what we call Orangebox free range approach. We want to be free range chickens, not battery hens. And that has all sorts of implication on productivity, on efficiency when you enter the building, and how you can serendipitously connect with your team members. So I think, yes, it is going to accelerate that, because the only reason we're going to go to the office now is to connect with our peers. Yes, we'll have to do that in a 2-meter distance from each other, but there's no point us turning up to the workplace and just typing away at our laptops and not speaking to anyone all day. I think there's been a mass recognition of that.
You think that's been kind of by the movement of sort of universities having that kind of environment? You don't really have, you might have a lecture hall where you're kind of there for an hour or 2 tops probably, but the majority of the time is spent with peers in social spaces. And then I guess once you leave university, to kind of reverse that, do you think it's sort of been led by universities?
100%. I think, again, you've hit the nail on the head there, Kay. You're exactly right in regards to who's leading the sort of revolution, if you like. Our university architects have had to figure out what a post-PC world looks like quicker than some of our commercial workplace architects. Because their student body, if you like, their customer, their client, the student body, comes in with sort of 4 or 5 cables hanging out of every pocket that they possibly have and going, where can I plug in? I need to plug in. And so the reliance on that individual terminal, that desktop terminal, has kind of lost its preeminence. And so University of Architects have had to go, okay, well, we need to connect students, of course, but we're kind of not doing that in the traditional forms. And so we see these sort of vast variety of different typologies people will be working at, whether that be a 2-person meeting pod, whether that be a big, huge sort of like 25-bay communal table, all and everything in between those two variants. So our universities are incredibly invested in regards to their spaces. I mean, remarkably, during the report that I was writing, Sticky Campus and the New Dynamics of Smart Learning, we stumbled upon the finding that 80% of our university spaces are either new or as good as new. And that's remarkable to think about. So 80% of our university estates are new or as good as new. And so that means that our students are just traveling around their university campus. And this has only happened in the last 20 years or so. Post 2008-9, obviously in the sort of commercial sector, if you like, there was lots of quantitative easing, people having to take their foot off the brake. And that just didn't happen at universities. Student numbers didn't fall. And with the rise in fees going from £3,000 to £9,000 and competition being really, really fierce, within the university sector, we all know that competition is rife, and it just drives the investment in spaces. And it just means now, today in 2020, that our university estates are the envy of the planet.
They have to prove that the large fees are being put to good use, I guess.
There's certainly an equation between competition and the market and the design of prestige spaces. It's also underpinned by a recognition of the need for creating spaces for students to work and learn in that's different from your traditional lecture theatre environment. You see that across the country. And the students are the archetypal, agile, smart workers, aren't they? They're connected constantly to the net, and they're moving around in and out of spaces. And that's a really exciting thing to see, I think. And particularly in this last few months, we've gone online with the students, and they're really happy to have the online tutorials and the online seminars and the interaction via Zoom. But what they do miss is that social interaction. That's the key, a sort of element of a student experience, isn't it? The meeting people, the sharing knowledge, but also sharing their lifestyles. And that's what's been hit, I think. And I think we'll have the same issue as you're describing in the workspace of social distancing, of course, in universities, won't we?
Absolutely. And there's a reliance I guess, on that media. I mean, it's wonderful that you said that you've been having your lectures and your lessons remotely, and presumably they're being recorded and they can be digested at any time. And that just aligns with a chapter in the report entitled University YouTube. I'm terrible at cooking. I haven't evolved as a human being in the kitchen for sort of 15 years. If I need to rely on a recipe, if I need to learn anything, then YouTube's my crutch. And YouTube's been a crutch for learning since now, for now primary right through to secondary and higher. And universities have been able to react quicker in the pandemic than our private organizations have, because they've had those platforms already set up. They've had trials and tests, and they've had all sorts of certification already mapped out. It's been private organizations that have been struggling to actually all of a sudden, all of our connection and teamwork is now online, whereas it's far more seamless for our student bodies to be doing that.
Is it a generational thing, do you think? I know that I'm familiar with your boomers and millennials paper, which is really informative, actually, really quite interesting about how different generations work in different ways. And it's just that I guess the workplace is taking time to catch up.
Yeah, we've charted it to be generational. I mean, the report that you've referenced, it is a fantastic report. I'd urge people to nip online to our website. You can download it. But two bookend generations, boomers and millennials, and how they have to interact in the workplace. And today, in 2020, we have the most varied amount of generations in a workplace than we ever have done before. There's two things that affect generations. There's technology developments within their lifetime, and then it's parenting styles. iGen, if you like, or Gen Z at the moment, who migrating through our universities, they're defined by the internet and only having that as a resource of information. Not only, but having that as a crutch throughout their entire lives. And imagine them not knowing life before the internet. And so that sort of constant connectivity enables them to sort of move with a speed and agility, as we've just mentioned, just sort of migrating from space to space and not even thinking twice about ever losing connectivity or in that space, and thinking about, actually, if I'm isolated for a few days and I'm online, then I'm not really isolated at all, because since I was 7 years old, my best friend's been in Brazil, and I play Fortnite with him every night for 2 or 3 nights, and that's the relationship that I have. And there are all sorts of sort of nuanced differences between our generations. You can get into a bit of a trap of sort of making generalizations and mass sweeping statements. And if I do that, I apologize, because I often get a slap on the wrist from team members for doing that. But the exposure to gamification, Deloitte at the moment on their graduate scheme, gamifying their entire process. So if you go to a certain amount of meetings, or you interact or engage with sort of extracurricular type seminars, CPDs, throughout your week on the graduate scheme, then you get extra points. And so you've got this web portal or app, and you just sort of accumulate points throughout the week, and then you might get you might move up a layer or a level. Ultimately, then after 6 months of the graduate scheme, you might sort of meet the boss at the end level, and if you defeat that boss, then great, you might get a job. iGen or Gen Z have been exposed to these sort of marketing, and it is a marketing tactic, this sort of gamification of a lot of media, and I do fear that that's the route that we may be going down. If you move into a building and they've got a space finding app, and you manage to find a space 4.6 seconds faster than you did yesterday, you get a gold star on the app, and it's, if you get 10 gold stars by the end of the month, then you're a sort of better employee. I sort of don't really want to move to that dystopian world.
Sounds like sort of shifting into sci-fi, doesn't it? But I think it's to do with what we're used to. And I suppose the generations are used to different things, aren't they? And it's breaking down those barriers. Even old people like ourselves, perhaps, or older people, can cope with the new ways of doing things that the younger generations have grown up with. But it's just breaking down the patterns of how the office is arranged conventionally at the moment, and the investment required to break those structures apart and rebuild, it's time consuming, it's difficult to get an organisation to change direction, but actually the benefits are clearly there, and you've done a lot of research on that. Just wanted to have a chat really about your role at Orangebox. It's clearly not just about selling bits of furniture, is it? Although that's what the business is built upon. I'm interested in the approach to the research that you guys do, which is quite a significant part of what you present. Tell me a bit more about that.
My relationship with Orangebox goes back a long way. I'm research and insight manager at Orangebox, and so the aim of our department is to understand the future of workplace and where we may be heading in. Because at Orangebox, when we were a smaller organisation, our development times, we used to get product from sketchpad to showroom in 12 months. We only had to think about UK testing and certification. We had a smaller team, so there was more serendipity. We could react a little bit quicker. Now, on some of our larger product platforms, our development times are out anywhere between 3 to 4 years. And so if we don't have, as a business, an organization, we don't have any sort of vision about how our spaces might look in 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 years, then we'd be a really dumb company. And that our efforts and our resources currently being funneled into the business would just be misplaced. And so that's been recognized, and we get incredible support from the business. We get put on platforms and we help communicate some of our research, and that's really important. It's also really important for the health of the brand too, because we operate in a very competitive. We often get frustrated at Orangebox because there's our creative director Gerard Taylor, and a wonderful man. He gets frustrated with what he calls sort of Me Too products, and that's often at Orangebox, and there are countless other wonderful manufacturers. So I'm not just saying this about us as a business or a brand, but we'll take the research that we've invested in, like Kay mentioned, boomers and millennials, or sticky campus, and we'll invest in a certain product platform, and then that product platform might get adapted and sort of manipulated and sort of brought to market for cheaper and made offshore rather than onshore. I mean, that's really important for Orangebox. Actually, a ridiculous amount of our products and our supply chain and our componentry comes from a really small radius around our factory in South Wales. So that onshoring has actually stood us in quite good stead actually during the pandemic, because we get sort of 20-30% of our stuff from Italy, very, very, very little amount from outside the EU, but there are other people out there really struggling with supply chains at the moment. But yeah, my relationship with Orangebox goes back since I was 14, so I've worked kind of on and off for the organisation since then. I grew up around the corner from our factory, our original factory in Hengoed, just north of Ystrad-Mynach, and points if you can spell Ystrad-Mynach. If you look it up on Google, it's a wonderfully typical Welsh town. And I grew up around the corner from the factory, and so on school holidays I would just nip along and kind of just cash in hand, really, just help them out with I don't know, clearing up some of their production lines or helping to box up some products. And the relationship, really, the connection just grew from there. When I was doing sort of work experience, when I was in college doing work experience, and I would constantly sort of go back to the business, and they would help support. After my university studies, going back and engaging with them and doing a sort of graduate scheme with them. So my connection with Orangebox is quite deep. When we first started 20 years ago, they were very, the sort of status quo, if you like, of the workplace and how you connect people within the workplace was all really sort of set out in concrete, really. If we went up against the big players in our market, then we would come unstuck. And so we decided then to sort of focus on this middle ground. Some of the language being used in the middle ground were things like breakout, cafe spaces, so all of this social connection, and that was coupled with an untethering of technology. If people are able to move around a little bit more, then let's create some spaces for them. Gerard Taylor, our creative director, was a wonderful human being. He sort of grabbed our product development program by the scruff of its neck and really just shaped us as an organization to provide solutions for those who want to migrate away from the workstation. And who knew that was, well, actually, he would say that he knew, because it was an informed, design solutions. But I think everybody at the factory, everybody in the village of Hengoed, and sort of everybody that touches Orangebox in our local area didn't quite know, I think, of the sort of vast growth and the influence of some of our products we're going to have.
I'm just trying to think back to the point where agile working and smart working came into the lexicon of our designing. I mean, I feel like we've been designing like that for years, 10, 15 years of trying to introduce those breakout spaces and touchdown zones. And it's still something quite new for a lot of people, though, isn't it? In the office workspace world, the idea of shifting over to smart working. What's the thing? I mean, you mentioned the impact of Gerard Taylor coming in with a bit of vision, I guess. Do you think were there any other factors that were influencing the adoption of those types of working practices?
I guess what Jerry did was identify that this migration away from the tethered station and the sort of reliance upon tethered technology, there would be a direct correlation between our adoption of more flexible spaces and that the sort of trust given to wireless technology in our spaces. Because for a very long time, we were just connecting dumb bits of furniture. So until, you're right in what you say, Jonathan, so until that started to creep in 15 years ago, we were just connecting really dumb bits of furniture. Back in the 1880s, within a 10-year or decade period, there were 4 key inventions that just shaped our office environment: the telephone, the typewriter, the electric light bulb, and the elevator. Within our industrial revolution, they all came online in Western Europe in a 10-year period. An amazing time for architects at that time. And New York City was sort of testament to that, because it went from 4 stories to 44 stories with the elevator. But with the typewriter and the telephone, it meant just that millions of people are just anchored to their workstation. And for a very, very, very long time, up until that point you just mentioned, Jonathan, that's exactly what we were doing. We were designing spaces around those 4 key inventions, and 2 of them have fundamentally changed. Think of the telephone, the typewriter. We now have the same functionality as we wander around any environment that we can think of. And that's really been perpetuated during the pandemic. But it was Jerry's vision that identified that, okay, so in this new workplace, in a smart working environment, we really need to be connecting people and not just these dumb bits of furniture. 1-to-1 fixed desk ratios really starting to be highlighted to be inefficient. And a lot of statistics will be bandied around from various different surveys. Your workstation will be ineffective, unoccupied for 40% of the day. And that's not smart. Everybody can recognize that. So there was a new adoption. Couple that with sort of technology being put in the hands of our employees. And we need to be responsible in designing solutions, because for a little time, when we thought about breakout was just the reception, and it would be a nice sofa system from a wonderful Italian manufacturer with very little ergonomic thought to its solution. And we kind of understood that actually it's going to be a bit of a challenge on our hands here, because we can't just be populating our spaces. If we're asking people to migrate from their individual workstation to complete tasks, then we need to be quite responsible in what we give them to go to. So that's why Orangebox, we're focusing on things like integrated lumber within our upholstery. How can that sofa system actually start to behave responsibly like the ergonomic solutions that you get in a task chair? That's really important to think about. The materiality that we use and how that can affect even just moods, or even can affect the purpose of that space and the functionality of it. So there have been multiple factors, but I think it's the technology that's really amplified the change.
I think you're right, that technology thing. I remember going to the Milan Furniture Fair years and years ago, and people were walking around with these mobile phones, and you're thinking, Christ, look at that. And the thought of, well, we used to have to make arrangements, didn't we? I sound like an old man here. I'll meet you somewhere at 3 o'clock, and that was what you did. But now, of course, we're much more flexible and fluid. And I just want to wonder how the research that you're generating, how you integrate that into the design process with your design team. What's the sort of discussion there?
Yeah, we work incredibly close together. In fact, a couple of members of the design team are within my team in the research insight department. So there's some great synergy between the two. And there's plenty of examples I can give you in regards to how our research impacts the design. One fairly recently out of the Sticky Campus and the new dynamics of smart learning, identifying that on that 18-month process, a lot of estates managers and facilities managers and educational leaders saying, okay, well, we're designing this wonderful new library and we're adopting activity-based learning. Students are going to have the choice and the variety that they need, this entire plethora of work settings. But for every student, they need one power socket. And so, okay, we're having the sort of design challenge of, okay, well, we're saying here that sort of 10, 15 students can be using this new sort of sofa system where they've got all integrated tables and ergonomic support and et cetera, but we never thought about deploying one power socket per person, because daisy chaining that amount of power through upholstery, it can be a real challenge. And so that's how we work very closely together. So we got to a solution where we had to punch holes, or I'm not going to say this very elegantly, but designers will kill me, but we had to create cavities in the seat of our away from the desk system so that we can daisy chain power, and adopting the upholstery to fit sort of our power units, etc. It was a bit of a challenge. And then, of course, having to work hand in hand and deliver that system, depending upon where that floor box is for that particular client. And of course, we're wanting to give flexibility. So where are other floor boxes going to have to be in the future? And so there are lots of things to consider, but that's how those two things marry themselves. I will get briefs from the designers to get out there and try to get under the skin of a certain industry or of a certain subject matter. So the two work hand in hand. So, for example, I'm going to spend the next 2 months talking to lots of architects' practices about the hula hoop office. And what's really important is Monday to Thursday I'll be doing that, but Friday, the most important day of the week, is I've created a feedback loop to the design team so that over the course of maybe a 2-year development program, they're getting the feedback that they need.
Timescales for me, I don't think I appreciated just how it would take from kind of that body of research to then being implemented into work. It's quite surprising, actually. So you predicting the future, 7 years in advance is quite impressive, I guess.
Well, and Kay, it's nigh on impossible. Because if you asked me this time last year about the sort of health of workplace in June 2020, I wouldn't have said it was. I wouldn't have told you that I'd be talking about hula hoops and
yeah.
And the sort of
is there any research that you've had to kind of scrap in light of the pandemic?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, not scrap, but I've had to put on hold a project that I was working on, which is data-driven design. And so over the last 10 years or so, there's been a lot of data capture from our facilities and estates teams around how people move when they get into the building and how long it takes them to get into the building and then to get their coffee and then move back to their workstation. There's been all sorts of programs of like that. But now we're on the precipice of taking that data and starting to design spaces with it. And there is one practice in London, I won't sort of mention their name, but they're starting to use some of that data to influence their design. And so their pitch back to the client will only be focused on this data analytics of a kind of a 12-month survey that they did with that client previously. And so I was trying to get under the skin of that, and just purely from a resource point of view, that's had to stop. And I actually think that subject matter has probably had to stop anyway, because our workplaces have been empty for the last 3-4 months.
Are you looking to sell abroad then? Because there must be enough offices in the UK to focus for the rest of your life on, I guess, wouldn't there?
We're lucky in the UK because we have a fantastic breadth of innovative spaces. We have challenging architects, brave clients, and so some of the sort of examples that we set globally are the bar that we set as workplace designers is really, so certainly not as furniture manufacturers, solely, but as architects, as space designers and clients, we're very brave. And so some of our best examples of innovative workplace design comes from the UK, but then we can take some of those learnings elsewhere. And it's really stark on my journey with Orangebox. I do travel quite a lot before the pandemic, and the stark difference between the east and west coast of America is really quite stark and shocking. If you go to New York City, and it's just Herman Miller's Action Office, everybody's in their cubicles and partitioning, and then I know there are examples in between, but then you're in the Valley in San Fran, and I'm not sure if I remember the client's name, but there were 400 people at this organization. It was a tech disruptor. So there were 400 people in the organization, and there were over 190 dogs also in the building.
That's going to divide people, but I can see there's a certain amount of well-being advantages from having a nice little pet, that they use them in old age pensioners' homes, don't they, to connect to the residents. But it's a bit like the difference between London and Devon, you see. Relaxed way of life, rolling our shorts, enjoying the sunshine.
Regionally in the UK, we've really brought down the sort of disparity between, everybody thinking that the most innovative spaces are either in London or in the South East. And that's simply just not the case. I mean, Department for Work and Pensions up in Newcastle, they're up to 60% of people who work in that organisation that are free range. They sort of turn up, they have their little neighbourhoods. And so we've got a really good balance across our island with engaging in these new strategies.
How do you ensure that, or how do you support designers or organisations in implementing the smart learning environments correctly? Because you could go into your showroom and look at all the furniture and think, that looks brilliant, I'll get that, and put it together in a way that doesn't quite work. It's that understanding of why you're combining things, which I think is critical to the success of ranges of furniture like the ones you have. How do you support people in making that happen correctly?
Well, that is really difficult, John, actually. And that's been one of the reasons why we haven't been moving as quickly as maybe we should have been in the adoption of these types of spaces, either in education or in workplace. What we'll try and do is try and handhold that client as much as possible from previous learnings. And we'll try and take them on a sort of discovery, if you like, of other environments that we've helped before. And we'll try and bring them to kind of understand what their brief is and how we can help support. But really, whether it be workplace or education, what we're looking for is variety. And because we have no idea what that space may be used for on an hour-to-hour basis. We, of course, know what the tasks are going to be, what's going to be taking place over a semester, for example. We can identify 12 tasks that are going to be happening with students. But really, on a kind of day-to-day basis, really quite tricky. And we're in danger, really, of sort of overusing this word of flexibility. It's really difficult flexibility because it costs a lot of money, to put everything on lockable casters. It is just a nightmare. It's a nightmare for facility staff. It's a nightmare for furniture designers. So there does need to be an element of understanding, what the brief is, the dedication of this certain neighborhood or environment. That's really important. But how do we do it? We just have to trust that faculty know what they want, and the architect and the space designer that they're working with has an understanding and knowledge of how they can start to deliver that. Within the pedagogy of a classroom, for example, as we move to more blended learning techniques, rather than sort of didactic kind of chalk and talk type that lecture hall type relationship. As we move to more kind of multi-sensory, I've got blended learning, for example, or a flipped classroom. Let's just take a flipped classroom, for example. We're asking now our students, instead of to come to the classroom and here's your challenge, here's 25 questions to answer. I've already given you those 25 questions. I gave them to you last week, so you're going to figure them out in your own time. And then what we're going to do is we're going to come to the classroom, and then we're going to solve all of those as a team together. We're going to sort of talk through some of the answers, and we're going to see how we got there. So that's sort of a flipped classroom, if you like. We have no sort of idea going from that chalk and talk auditorium type setup to a flipped classroom. It's very difficult for our educational space designers to put that classroom together. They're just asking for things on casters, and every day I'm going to have to turn it into something else. So I've got to be honest and say that we're still learning.
Just to kind of blow our own little trumpet, Kay and I have been doing the podcast delivery flipped classroom for about 3 years, and we've this is all pre-COVID, but I guess we were doing the bit in the studio in what we had available, and that was the difference. It wasn't a new space, it was an existing space. And what would be interesting would be to look again at how our spaces were being laid out, to how we could maximize the contact side of that. The sending out the stuff up front is brilliant because the students can consume it at their own pace, but it's that fitness for purpose of the environment. We're using inherited space, I suppose, rather than specifically designed. But it's, for you, Nathan, I guess it's about understanding what's going on in the space and then responding to that with either selections of furniture or designing something that creates a different way to deliver the space.
Yeah, absolutely. So having the sort of spectrum of specification across a product range. So just designing sort of a tabling solution, if you like, and then that tabling solution having a huge variety of options in regards to, okay, certain ones flip, certain ones have a certain amount of delivered power. So some of them have inductive charging in their services. Some of them have different types of casters to move on different types of flooring. I guess us as a manufacturer and as a solutions provider, that's kind of all that we can do. And that's why we work with great partners like yourselves. That's why we work with wonderful architects, and so they can sort of pick up where we will often sort of come short. Because even though our research and insight department is really helping us formulate our designs, understanding some sort of larger challenges in education or in workplace, it really does need to be a collaboration between sort of lots of parties and bodies.
A question for you, Jonathan. Do you think that the studio post-COVID will be different? Do you think this is an opportunity to sort of revamp the ways in which the students were working when they were in?
It's definitely up for grabs, but we don't really know what we're dealing with, even though because we're looking at September for returning students. They appear at the moment to be going to return, but we don't know what the social distancing rules will be there. But I really think there's an opportunity to reinvent how we deliver it, and the flipped classroom is great because all the, for the want of a better word, the boring stuff of actually learning it is taken away from the studio space, and the studio space then becomes a more social discussion space, interaction. Here's what I've done. What do you think of it? Yeah, brilliant, great. Can you do it like this? The nitty gritty they can plod through in their own time, which they really enjoy that. But then we need some spaces where they can interact and we can feel comfortable. And a whole row of desks doesn't necessarily do that. So yeah, the one thing that will probably hold it back is budget, because we're not going to be able to reinvent and order a load of new furniture in September. And that's going to slow stuff down. So we will have to just see. It's a combination of thinking quickly when we return on how we can rejig it, responding to the guidelines, and just trying to focus on where the value is. I think that's the key. It's talking to the students. What do they actually value about the experience of going to university, and how can we maximize that under the current circumstances, and push all the stuff they don't enjoy. They value it in a different way, but what they really enjoy is the interaction, and that's where furniture comes into play, because that facilitates interaction and sets up social engagement and makes people feel comfortable and relaxed. So there's great opportunities there, but we'll have to see. It's going to be interesting, and I think we can, we just got to try and get stuck into it and try and do something, and it will evolve over time.
Well, one thing you've mentioned there, Jonathan, which I think again plays into the acceleration thread that I was talking about a little bit earlier on, is that the very thing that you're engaging in with your students is that you're providing them a really social space to connect and solve problems. So take away the sort of, if you call it the nitty gritty, which I like, take away some of that and allow them to do that in their own time, and create an environment that sets up the best possible connections and social interactions that they can make. Surely that's exactly what our workplace is going to look like whenever we all get back to our work environments. That's going to be the important thing. So you're, I guess, correctly preparing your student body to behave and sort of recognize that new type of space. I think that might be an accelerator. I think we might see the adoption and the efficiency of the workplace as it becomes only really about social, about having a meeting and then maybe just sitting down for 5 minutes, catching up on emails, having another meeting. You're only in the office for 2 hours. That might be far more reflective of some of the environments and the relationship that you have right now, and that's going to be good.
I think we've got the opportunity to test some spaces that's fairly low risk, I think, in a way, because students are, they're adaptable, they like new things. So I think we've got the opportunity to explore how we might deliver stuff. And and I think the worst thing that you could do returning to work is get back to your desk and think, right, here we are, and start shuffling your papers and reposition your mug. It's like we don't want to go back necessarily to all those things. And this, I think it's the opportunity which is quite exciting about this hiatus we're in. That if we can just find the mental space to think about things a little deeply and reinvent, then it's going to be hugely beneficial, for our well-being, our health, the planet, all those sort of things that we're seeing, the side effects of inactivity. There's some really huge positives there.
A question, though, to you both. Do you think that the sort of Petri dish type beta mode that you talked about, the university being a great space to maybe trial and test certain initiatives, do you think that will become less appetizing to the deans and to the educational leaders as universities need to focus on being more of a business than a sort of academic provider?
I think because it's generally a 3-year course, there's a constant flow of new ways of learning, new ways of thinking. I think that progression is on a really short timescale, so it kind of reinvents itself all the time.
I think also if there's a business opportunity, I think universities are becoming more business aware. And I think as designers, like Kay and I are working in the commercial sectors, helping businesses realize their potential, in our design work, that attitude of spotting the opportunity could be key in terms of justifying the creation of a environment that is testing out solutions and ideas around education delivery, because that becomes a unique factor in differentiating us from other people. If we're pushing the boundaries of how learning is delivered, and also exploring what the real experience of being at university is about, then that could be seen as a selling feature to prospective students, and it could attract time and investment. The issue I guess we have, which I alluded to earlier, was the investment on renewal. And you mentioned that figure of 80% of campuses being as good as new, that's new investment. And what we are always struggling with is how to deal with the current stuff that's not new, the stuff that's slightly out of date, still perfectly functional, but actually is not fit for purpose in the way we can apply it, So it's investment at that level, which I think might be difficult. Because I'd love to come to your showroom, Nathan, and just like select from all the great things and right, let's put it into the studio, and we'd have this wonderful space. But of course, there isn't the money for that specific investment. Whereas, we're building spaces all over the university at the moment with great little chunks of money to do what we need to do. But it's those current spaces which I think is the challenge. But we'll see. And I think it would be an interesting approach to taking ownership of the spaces next semester is to deal with it in a much more of a more experimental way, perhaps. Something I've got a bit of time at the moment to think about.
Well, I think that's wonderful. The both of you are seeing that as and rightly so, as an opportunity. I think you made that sort of clear to me that that's certainly the best approach, to actually see this sort of the testing, if you like, the sort of frequency that students come through, and then why not be at the absolute sharp end of the future of learning. Yeah, I couldn't agree more with you. I think that's a wonderful response. You'll see massive benefit to that, I'm sure.
The way in which we think as designers is about trying to find new ways of doing things that make life either easier or more fun or more productive. So as practitioners, we're very open to that approach, and it's this ideal opportunity, isn't it? We've basically had to send all the students home early. We've had time to think about stuff. We've managed to keep the learning going, and I've got all my third years of submitting in a couple of days' time their final project, so it's all going on, it's all still happening, but we've had a bit of time away from the office, away from the workspace, away from the university to think, God, how can we do it differently? And what better opportunity, to reinvent ourselves. It's a very, if we can just grasp it, it's a very exciting moment.
Absolutely, and then think about all of the other sort of pent up resource and thinking that's currently being undertaken in any field. That there are a lot of minds right now. There's a lot of brain power in the United Kingdom having to think about their own problems and how they can overcome those challenges. And there might be some wonderful green shoots in a pre-vaccine, but certainly post-lockdown phase.
What inspires you about the process of researching and providing spaces?
What inspires me at the moment is the landscape at which we're designing for, and that's workplace. And I know that at Orangebox, 20% of our revenue will come from higher education, so at universities. I spent a long time, 18 months, researching that. But workplace is our sort of bread and butter. And workplace, whether it be pre or post-COVID, is in a really wonderful state of change, going from that hierarchical approach to now flatter networks. It's more about the human connections, more about what you're saying, about how you're perceiving yourself. And that's what I get really excited about, is that actually the space in which we're operating in workplace is actually incredibly fast moving, and it affects all of us. I'd rather work in workplace than I would in retail or hospitality. I really think there's some huge opportunities for change within workplace. So that's what drives me and my team, certainly.
Have you tried hula hooping? It's actually really difficult.
I can't do it.
Yeah, it's and as I've been doing research, a lot of people didn't used to do it around the waist. People used to do it around the neck a lot.
What?
I can do it around my neck. I can do it around my neck, but not my waist. Yeah.
Okay. Well, let's just take a bit of time, a bit of practice,
Oh, we've got time, haven't we? So.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Next time we talk, I want to see your hula hoop skills. Thanks to Nathan for taking the time to speak to us. Nathan's role really highlights the importance of research in the process of developing new products and providing insight into how they might be used, which is based on shifting human behaviour and the impact of culture and technology. As designers, the key to utilising the furniture ranges from Orangebox successfully is to truly understand what your customers and your consumers are doing and what their requirements in their day-to-day lives are. Building in flexibility allows you to cope with a wide range of user groups and accommodate the shifting dynamic of work and learning from student to student, employee to employee, and recognise the shifts that occur during the daily pattern of life. I look forward to seeing the results of his research into the hula hoop office and how that research may shape the future of the workspace. Thanks to Dave Clark from I Am The How for production support and invaluable advice in the setting up of this podcast. Kay Hanson for her planning support and co-hosting role for these and our educational podcasts at the University of Plymouth. And Mark Frith for the music. If you'd like to find out how to be a kick-ass interior designer and understand a bit more about our approach to blended learning and the use of podcasts, take a look at the link in the show notes for our interior design course at the University of Plymouth. Next week we talk to Honey Motomedian about sound and its impact on how we experience and appreciate spaces. I'd really like to hear your feedback on the podcast. Leave a comment or get in touch. Thanks for listening. Bye for now.